The title is A Lot of Problems with Sight, and that's a play on words. We're going to talk about the man named Lot. Romans 4, verse 4, and 2 Peter 2, verse 8. And we'll start in Romans 4, 4. Back up to 3, Romans 4, 3. He says, "For what saith the Scripture? Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness." Well, we would expect that. We know Abraham is the famous man in the Bible, and he's called the father of faith and all that. Abraham and Lot seem to be very different characters, though. However, you'll find they are the same in one category. In righteousness, God considers them both righteous, which is wild. I wouldn't necessarily put Lot in the category of righteous, but God did. Look at it in 2 Peter 2, verse 8. God thinks Lot was so righteous, he keeps repeating it in one verse. 2 Peter 2:8, "For that righteous man, dwelling among them and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds." Whew. Now we'll notice some things about him. Abraham, these two men are different. Abraham, obviously, they're both pictures in the Bible of someone who's following God. We'll call it a Christian in our age. And that Christian can either have the life of Abraham or that of Lot. Both of them were considered righteous. If you're saved, you're considered righteous. You might be an Abraham or you might be a Lot. That's up to you. Let's find out what makes the difference in the two. Abraham lives by faith. Lot lives by sight. Look back at the verse that we just read in 2 Peter 2, verse 8. "For that righteous man dwelling among them in," what was he busy doing? Seeing and hearing. That's sight. That's living by the flesh. Rather than by reading and studying, rather than obeying and trusting what God has said, he's looking and listening. Look at it in 2 Corinthians 4. This is a verse you probably have memorized. Paul says, while we look, 2 Corinthians 4:18, I didn't tell you where I am. He says, while we look not at the things which are seen. Really? You can't help but look at the things that are seen. You're a human. However, he said that shouldn't be your focus. That's what he's talking about. But the things which are not seen. But at the things which are not seen, for the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. That is, if you'll view what you're looking at as being temporal, then your focus won't remain on the temporal. It's just here today and gone tomorrow. It's something to be, Paul says, used and not abused. Okay, so that's what we do with this world. Look at the next chapter, 2 Corinthians 5. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 7. He's continuing the same theme. For we walk by faith, not by sight. Now, he's not saying go blind. What he's saying is, spiritually, your focus and what is the priority is the spiritual, not the physical. Now let's get to our sermon. Genesis 18, let's find these men. Genesis 18, verse 1, Abraham and Lot. "And the Lord appeared unto him," that's Abraham, "in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day." That's pretty wealthy, isn't it? Sitting in a tent. Well, that's what they did back then. That's the Bedouins still do it today. They live in tents. Now, these tents are pretty fancy, and they have the Persian rugs all laid out there, and but there's no central heat and air. I mean, Americans would not be comfortable. But that's the way Abraham was. His focus was not necessarily in the world's wealth, the world's idea of making it great. It was just getting by, and face it, he's out in the middle of nowhere. Who would know whether or not he had Taj Mahal? He's making do with what he's got. Look at it in chapter 18, verse 10. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee, this is God talking, according to the time of life, and lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door. Now look at this phrase, which was behind him. So this is something that has changed over the years. Abraham spending his time where? Outside. The tent's behind him. That's where Sarah is. People don't do that anymore. They lock themselves in a little room and peck on a little keyboard and look at a screen. Things have changed. You hear God better when you get out and start moving and working, when you do something. But this getting locked up like a little woman, no wonder the world has gone sissified. That's where Sarah was. That's where the women belong. I better quit before I get in trouble here. Genesis 19. Go to the next chapter. Genesis 19, verse 1. That's quickly. That's right. Genesis 19:1. This is going to tell us about Lot. And there came two angels to Sodom at the even, and Lot sat in the, not the tent, the gate of Sodom. And Lot, seeing them, rose up and met them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. Lot's a little different character. He's a somebody. Abraham was a somebody too, but there was just nobody to notice he was a somebody. Here, Lot is in a city where the other people can applaud him and put titles on him and make big over him. So he's sitting in the city gate. That's where the important people are. Look down at verse 3. The angels come in and they say, well, we'll do what we normally do. We'll just stay wherever we find a comfortable spot. We'll just hunker down right here in the street. And he says, don't do that. Genesis 19:3. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him and entered into his house. Oh, he's fancy. The tent life is over for him. He's moved into a brick or mortar or whatever, however they built it. He had him a house. It was fancy. Now, with the mess that's about to happen, it's probably a good thing it was a house and not a tent to keep those booger bears out that are about to come. We'll notice the problem, a lot of problems with sight, as referring to our man Lot here. The first thing we'll notice I call contention. Contention. If you just live on the eyes and the flesh's whims, you're bound for contention. Look at it in chapter 13, Genesis 13. You know, self-preservation is supposed to be natural, and you do protect yourself. You should. I remember I was doing a thing on an upholstery piece, and it was a spring. We've got these big long S springs, and I was trying to pull it down to make it fit. And that thing's under great tension. And the little pliers I was using didn't hold that long. And when they let loose, they came up and smacked me in the eye. And before I even know that the thing had let loose, my eye closed. That's self-preservation. That's your body knowing, or maybe it was God doing it for me. That's your body knowing there's something that needs to happen to protect you that you're not even aware of yet. But you got to be careful. Self-preservation can easily slip into self-conceit. And then, if you go that far with it, any means to justify the man in the mirror is approved because he's number one. Now, I would have thought the same thing with my eye. You know, any move I had made would have been great to protect that eye. However, I didn't have any control over it. God did. But that's the same with man. Man wants to protect that number one, the one who's in focus. And because of that, you look through history and you'll see them go to many lengths in order to protect who they think is the most important. Look at it in our passage here in Genesis 13, verse 7. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelt in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. These are herdmen. You know what that is? That's people who are herding up cattle. Um, However, I'm going to change it a little bit. These are herdmen. But most contention nowadays begins with what men have heard. That's a fact. If you're living by the flesh and by sight, all of your senses are designed to protect you. And so you take everything in from a certain point of view. How's it going to affect me? And that'll start you a war. We're in Genesis 13. Turn to Proverbs 13. Let's see if we can identify the root of this rebel. Genesis 13 and Proverbs 13. Now, Proverbs 13 will be in verse 10. He says, only by pride cometh, exactly what's going on, contention. But with well advised is wisdom. Abraham must have known the contention that was going to be caused with all this cattle, and he cut off the range war at the pass. He said, you need to head out, find you another spot. In Genesis 13, verse 5, he says, and Lot also, which went with Abraham, had flocks and herds and tents. So the problem is they got too much junk. An accumulation of junk is not necessarily a blessing. Go look at my shed. Just having junk for the sake of having junk ain't any good. It needs a purpose. Here, the problem is maybe they had a purpose for all of their junk. However, they didn't have a place for it. You need a purpose and you need a place for your junk. And here they've got too much. And he says, no, this is not going to work with us sitting right here. Now, God does the same thing spiritually. It seems like the Christians, you remember in Acts where he says, you're going to be witness in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. Why? Because he didn't want them all sitting in one spot where they were comfortable and enjoying. He said, move out, spread out. Now, he could have been doing the same thing with Abraham and Lot. Had Lot been living right? No, he was righteous, but he wasn't living like it. Had he been living right, he could have been a witness in the 5 cities that he was moving down to. But he chose to live after the flesh. Lot is soon to learn that contention leads to our next point, restriction, not expansion. In Genesis 13, verse 11, then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves, the one from the other. Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his what? Tent. This is before he moved up to house living. He was still in a tent. He started out slow, and he started out, humble. He's in a tent, and he's not even in the city, but he sure is looking at it. He pitched a tent just in the direction of those cities down there, toward Sodom. Of all the cities to face, Sodom was the one he faced. Look at it in Genesis 13, verse 14. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was departed from him, lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. Lot sure was in a hurry to move on, and he moved a little fast. As soon as he left, God comes down and says, it's all yours. Now Lot has restricted himself to a specific boundary. He said, I'll pick that spot right there. Maybe he should have humbled himself and said, Abraham, we'll do whatever we need to so that we can get along, I don't hear any of that. I don't hear anybody praying and asking God for directions in it. Lot should have said, I'm going to get with the guys and find out what happened. No, it's a good idea for me to go down there and I'll take over those 5 cities I see. Verse 15, he said, for all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. Now we get down to it. Lot is not really his seed. He's of his family, a distant kin. However, he's not really of his seed. God knows what he's doing. But many times for us, the fact is we move on faster than we should, just like Lot did. Look at Psalm 81. Psalm 81, verse 12. Psalm 81, verse 12. This is a recount of the history of Israel. From God's point of view, here he says, "So I gave them up to their own heart's lust, and they walked in their own counsels." Verse 13. "Oh, that my people had hearkened unto me, and Israel had walked in my ways. I should soon have subdued their enemies, and turned my hand against their adversaries." God says, we were right about to do something great here, and they turned around and ruined it. You know, that's the hard part in Christianity, is to continue on when it gets tough. Lot gave up quick. Look at it in Psalms 106. Psalm 106, verse 24. Psalm 106, verse 24. "Yea, they despised the pleasant land. They believed not his word." That tells me they didn't think the land was that pleasant. God's the one who thought it was pleasant, not them. Wherever God puts you is where he thinks is pleasant for you. If you don't think it's pleasant, you're the one that has the problem, not God. The restriction that was placed on Lot was intended for him to recoup, to realize, hey, look, it's me and God now, just like it was Abraham and God now. I'm not sitting under Abraham anymore. I'm going to be accountable direct to God. But he didn't do that. The restriction was intended for reformation and visual adjustment, not negotiation. That's what he did. Every time God wanted to restrict him, he wanted to tell God what his restrictions ought to be. You don't do that. Genesis 19, verse 17. Here's the angels. They've come to Sodom and they're going to deliver him. Verse 17, Genesis 19, 17. "And it came to pass when they brought them forth abroad, he said, Escape for thy life." I'd say that's pretty plain. That's pretty cut and dry. If you don't escape, you will die. If you want to live, you want your life, get going. "Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest thou be consumed." That's pretty plain. I would not need a concordance to figure that out. Verse 18. "And Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my lord." In the original, I think you really meant something different. This is the one who's saving him from the city that's about to blow up. The one he watched just blind a bunch of perverts. And he's turning around telling him, not so. Wow. Verse 19. "Behold now, thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy." I'd say he's skating on thin ice, but he's acting like that, he's got all the cards in his hand. He says, "Which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life. I cannot escape into the mountains, lest some evil take me and I die." These supernatural beings just told him, escape to the mountain to live. His response is, if I go to the mountain, I'll die. He's decided his little brain is superior to the angelic being. Well, that's from living based on sight and flesh and reason. Now, you've got to use your brain. I mean, well, you should use your brain. Most of the drivers in Pensacola don't. But I'm getting better. You're getting better. Here's Lot trying to tell the plan of God that he's got a better one. Look at it, verse 20. It says, "Behold, now the city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one." He's got him another plan. Let's make a detour. There's a little city over there. He says, "Is not it a little one? And my soul shall live." See, I've cooked up my own life-saving program. Well, then why didn't he just stay in Sodom? That was a city. What he's going to find out is that the place he wanted to go is just like Sodom. I wouldn't go save nobody's life. Going to destroy more of them. And then he has to flee from there. In 1930, it says, "And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains." He finally got it. Had I just obeyed to begin with, that's where they told me to go. And his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, and his 2 daughters. Here, Lot finally ends up where God intended him to go, but he stumbled around trying to get there because he wanted to do it his own way, the way that made sense to man. Many times God does what does not make sense to man so that he gets the credit for it. He wants to direct the show, not find somebody smart enough to run the show themselves. Unlike Abraham's habit of erecting an altar at every stop, Lot exchanges the tradition of an altar for the captivity of alcohol. Once he gets to the mountain, he should have put up an altar. God, I finally got here. Thank you for getting me here. And you just barely saved my life in that last city, and I'm glad. I'm right where you told me to go. I'm here now. But he didn't. He wanted to crawl into a bottle and hide. And he tried to. A new creature living by the sight of the eyes really is a farce. It's a hypocrite. Because you're a new creature, you've been given new sight, the ability to see with faith. To go back and use the dead man's eyes that are in the grave is hypocritical. Lot has learned a few things, maybe. He learned contention leads to restriction. And finally, restriction is going to lead to a description. Luke 17. Lot's life becomes a description of how God is going to curse the earth when he comes back. Armageddon, he says, if I want to talk to you about how bad it's going to get, I'm going to tell you about Lot. Ooh. Luke 17, verse 28. Likewise also, as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed, I always say them all, but them all. This is God, Jesus Christ here. He's saying, here's what's going to happen in the end. They're going to think they're getting away with living it up, according to the flesh, the things they can see. And according to man, from his point of view, they've got everything that man could want. He said, but just like I did with Lot, I'm going to destroy it all. In James 5, he says this, James 5:5, "Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in the day of slaughter." He said, you've done good to yourself with the best you could. But what you didn't realize was you were doing it right under the guillotine. The day of slaughter. Not everybody escapes this illusion of living by sight. Just because Lot made it out doesn't mean everybody will. Go back to Luke 17. Continue down to verse 13. Verse 32. Luke 17:32. Remember Lot's wife? She didn't make it. Verse 33. Whosoever shall seek to save his life, that is self-preservation, that is seeing with the eyes, shall lose it. And whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. In conclusion, we need a happy thought. James 5, verse 7. James is going to give us the answer to eye trouble. The answer is this, James 5:7, be patient, therefore. Would you hate to hear that? Be patient. I don't recall hearing that too often, but that's a something that you tell your little kids. Be patient. Just wait. Be patient, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Now look at this. Behold the who? Husbandman. That's who he's referring to Jesus as. What did we see before? We see herdsman. We're not worried about what people hear. We're worried about a leader. Be patient. Behold the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient. That is, reject the contention that's going to show up. You have no way of avoiding that. It's going to happen. Contention is going to show up because it doesn't have to be both-sided. It can be one-sided. Now you have to continue it if it's going to turn into something. He says, establish your hearts. That is, in restriction time, like was given to Lot over and over, see the unseen. Do something different than you've done before. In restriction, he was up there in the mountain. He could have done something different. He could have started building an altar like Abraham did, but he didn't. He went back to the bottom. He could have started saying, now from now on, we're going to start living by faith. I'm going to go back to the commands God told us, and that's where we're going to live. But he didn't. It was back to the flesh. The rest of our verse says, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Prepare to hear an acceptable description from the judge of all the earth. That's what we should be doing when we're in a restriction area. Lot lived by sight and left the earth with many sights and signs of destruction. We think of Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, but there was 5 cities. Now, one was spared temporarily. That's all part of Lot's influence right there. He left destruction after destruction. He created 2 lines of descendants that became enemies to Israel all their days. Not a good lineage there. Abraham, on the other hand, is what we call the father of faith, and God gives him a title, the friend of God. I'd rather go that route. Now, I'm not saying it was fun for Abraham, wandering around out there not knowing where he was going. Every now and then getting word that his nephew has gone crazy again and he needs to get all his boys together and hand out pocket knives and go get them. Romans 8 verse 5. Romans 8 verse 5. He says, for they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Lot learned it the hard way. The angel said, get up in the mountain. There's not any taverns up there. There's not any town square or city gate that you can sit under. Go up there and live after the Spirit. He said, no, I want to go down there to the city. He goes down to Zoar, and you know what happens? Suddenly his eyes are open. He said, God squished the last couple of places that were just like this. I better get running. And he did. He says, if you live carnally, it's death. Live spiritually, it's life. In Deuteronomy 30, he says this. I'll just read it to you. He says, I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death. Therefore, choose life. The answer for Christian is not the sight, it's faith.